Welcome, everyone, to the 2024 Screenwriters Lecture Series. We are incredibly excited and honoured to have as our opening night speaker Mike Leigh. As Maria was saying, and as I'm going to repeat because it's worth repeating, he is one of the world's most renowned filmmakers, and he is famous for his uniquely collaborative way of approaching storytelling. One of my favourite Mike Leigh quotes is, quote, "Given the choice of working in Hollywood or poking steel pins in my eyes, I'd prefer steel pins." After the events of the last week, that feels poignantly apposite, as does his seminal Vera Drake. From a huge body of work, which includes 16 feature films such as High Hopes, Life is Sweet, Naked, Secrets and Lies, Topsy-Turvy, and Peterloo, just hold that thought for a moment. This year's Stunning Hard Truths has just come out. Mike continues to drill down into the forgotten lives, elevating their humanity through his extraordinary storytelling techniques. He has a signature integrity, exhaustive research and rehearsal, which is like no other filmmaker working. And we are incredibly grateful to him for giving us this lecture tonight and talking about his process. He will lecture, and there will then be a Q&A with Ellen E. Jones, author, journalist and co-host of the BBC's flagship programme Screenshot, after which, as we always do, we'll open it up to questions from the floor. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mike Leigh.
Thank you. Let me begin by saying that, on the whole, you will know that what I do and how I do it is fairly idiosyncratic and isn't what most people do by way of how to make films. So I just want to preface everything I say by saying that what I do and what I do with everybody I work with is pretty idiosyncratic and comes out of a personal feeling about stuff, life and art and practice. And therefore, I, in all sincerity, humbly, do not propose to suggest that anybody else tries to do what I do, because it's not as straightforward as that. But I just thought I'd say that. I don't want to be thought in any way to be proselytizing, because I'm not. I just want to talk about what we get up to. A screenplay. It's already been referred to in the clips we just saw. A screenplay is conventionally and traditionally a detailed, comprehensive document that tells you everything that's going to be in the film. It embodies its structure. It contains everything there is about locations. It contains everything that everybody says. It's a very detailed and important and necessary tool. Hands up, I've never written one. Ever, not even once. And I've made a lot of films. And again, I'm not showing off, I'm just telling you the way it is. I have made a lot of films. I do take the credit of writing and directing because I've written and directed a lot of films. I will talk about how we've gone about that, how I've gone about that, and as well as films, as you all know perhaps, that I've created over 20-odd stage plays, which, like the films, were and are precise, finished, detailed, I hope, well-constructed and well-written pieces, but arrived at by the elaborate means and process and journey that I'll talk about. I think the first principle to share is this. The way that painters make paintings, novelists write novels, sculptors make sculpture, poets write poems, musicians create music, etc., etc., is really how I, collaborating with other people on both sides of the camera, make films, which is to say that we embark on a journey of discovery as to what the film is by the process of making it. Everybody, you will all be, certainly writers will be familiar with the stage of the proceedings where there are ideas floating around and you've somehow got to start making them, manifesting them in some way. That's what happens to me. I have made some films where there was a particular issue or agenda, not very many. One of them was Secrets and Lies, which arose from the fact that people close to me in my family, two lots of people, adopted kids. And I decided to investigate that whole experience, that whole area. The other was Vera Drake, which is about a backstreet abortionist in 1950, which was before the 1967 Abortion Act. And I'm old enough to remember what it was like when people had unwanted pregnancies, and people like Vera Drake and various kinds of abortionists were around. And I, for many years, had a notion to deal with that in a film. But I've made a whole lot of films. Oh, sorry, I should also say that the historical films that I've made, which is to say Topsy Turvy about Gilbert and Sullivan, Mr. Turner about the painter, and Peterloo about the Peterloo Massacre. Again, those started with the premise of let's investigate those areas. But even in the case of those films, the idea was to say, let's look at these historical figures, the historical people and their world and their experiences and their crises and their passions and all the rest of it, in the same way that we look at contemporary characters whom we invent and approach them with the same techniques and in the same philosophy. But those films and the other two that I mentioned are films where there was a more concrete notion. But I've made a lot of films where there was either just a feeling or a kind of possible notion of some sort related to some other notion, but vague. All of this is familiar to many of you because this is what we artists do at the beginning of the process. So that's always on the go in some shape or form. But another thing that's, for me, part of the process of starting to think how and what should we make happen is to think, well, I really think it would be great to work with this actor or that actor, which may or may not be somebody that I've worked with previously. So you think, well, let's get that actor or actress on board and let's see where we go. Because, as I say, the journey of making the film is going to be, and always is, even with the historical ones, a journey of discovering what it is as we go along. Which is to say, and again, I repeat, this is what other artists do in other media, is to get something going, react to it, that gives you an idea that moves you in that direction, that stimulates what you do in this corner, that stimulates something else. And gradually, what you are doing, of course, is starting to think of the possible film. I've never made a film yet, and I think I never will, where what we wound up with was, in any sense, what I thought we might wind up with, because that's not what it's about. It's about discovering it. Of course, as has been said, because I am exclusively concerned with putting on the screen or the stage real people like we all are, real issues, real relationships. I'm not really concerned with fantasy and extraordinary and extraterrestrial and all those other sorts of things. I'm a great fan of those things, but I don't particularly want to do them myself. That, to some extent, defines, makes feasible the kind of thing that I'm going to talk about. It's about collaborating with actors to create characters, to find characters, to build those characters, and I'll talk more about that in a little while in more detail, to explore the characters, their world, their activities, their work, build their relationships, build their backstory, etc., etc. And then to distill that into a structured and finally precise piece of work. I'll come back to that. This whole way of going about things, to boil it down to the simplest terms, falls into two stages. The preparatory stage and the stage of actually making the piece of work, which is to say, shooting and editing the film. And I'm going to talk about the second stage first, because if I talk about, my experience is, if I talk about the first stage, you can be distracted and bogged down in all sorts of aspects of that, which I will talk about. But actually, the most important thing is what we actually shoot, what we actually take to the cutting room, what the actual artifact is, so that the preparations, important though they are, and I will talk about, as I say, are by way of laying the foundations. So I will talk about the actual making of the film, the shooting and the distillation of the film, the editing. What we shoot in my films, with very, very, very rare exceptions, is very precise action, very filmed for the most part in a formal classical way, with very precise dialogue that's been been worked at and written in a complex but detailed way. And it is virtually never, there are tiny exceptions here and there for particular reasons, what you never see in my films is action or dialogue which is improvised on camera, on screen. In brackets, this is a minor aside, very occasionally you might get such moments. A snatched moment that just presented itself. I will show you one later on. Or it may be that you've got two people walking down the street amongst real people, and it really, the function of the scene is only to create the atmosphere of that, and it's not important that they are what they're actually discussing or anything. They may not even hear what they're actually saying, that kind of thing. That allows for, you've got the facilities, and by the time we get to the stage, I talk about it, you've got actors who are absolutely able to do the characters in any situation. So that is feasible. And the improvisation skills are all there. But I just thought I'd deal with that, what for some people is a myth, that because there's a talk about improvisation, that what you see on the screen is improvised. It isn't. If you were to visit the shoot, on a particular day, you would see precise action. You would see actors dealing, and again I shall illustrate this later with clips, you will see complex dialogue, in-depth dialogue, always thorough character dialogue, complex action of all kinds, but performed by actors with confidence, in a relaxed way, are very much actors in character, actors not playing themselves, actors going into character and really doing the character in question. What you won't see, which you would see, and forgive me for saying this, but it's necessary just to make a point. What you won't see that you will see in many a film is actors who can't remember the lines or who stumble over the lines, who say, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, and all of those things. Where in those situations you will be seeing actors who've not really had time to digest the lines, who haven't done any work to really assimilate the dialogue that's been written with the nature of the character or the characterization, I should say, how they're playing the character. Actors who are supposed to be playing spouses who've been together for 40 years, who only met that morning on the set. It's not funny, it's true. Actors wearing costumes that they don't feel comfortable in because they've never worn them before, etc. You won't see any of that because that's not what happens. Because, and this is where it's important to stress what happens on my films. It's not only about the actors and what the actors are doing, but it's the collaboration between everybody. The actor, the production designer, the costume designer, the makeup designer, and indeed everybody. Everybody's on the same page, and the work that goes into preparing the world of the characters and everything to do with them is a shared and sophisticated and grown-up business. During the shoot, and again, this is just talking about this major second part of the whole process. During the shoot, there will be shooting days and rehearsal days. Sometimes a rehearsal day can be a day or two. Sometimes, in the case of major sequences that had to be created, I mean, like the climax of Secrets and Lies, a 10-day gap was created. That's to say, rehearsal time in the location, on the set, without the crew. The shoot, scene by scene, sequence by sequence, location by location. We go to the location. We improvise, the actors improvise in costume, with real stuff, props, etc. In character, of course. And my job then is to take those improvisations, to stop, and we start to break down improvisations and to start to draw from them, to distill from them. We write the scenes, all the scenes, however complex and how much in depth they are. We write them through rehearsal. I never go away and write dialogue and come back and give it out. It is arrived at through rehearsal to a precise degree. We'll do that and prepare. Now, it's important for me as an artist, as a director, and as a writer, that I can only create a scene by being in the location and seeing it and experiencing the physical relationship between the characters and the place, as well as what happens and what they say, etc., etc. That's part of the creative process and a part of that journey of investigation. There are scenes in my films where we I pretty well knew what we needed to achieve, but you've still got to explore it in detail. There are sequences in my films where we didn't know what was going to happen. Indeed, for quite a number of my films, the shooting script, which I'll talk about later, not there yet, which has series of numbered potential scenes, which are numbered, will at a certain stage, it has often been the case that at a certain stage it will say scene 39, scene 40, from scene 41 to etc., 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 row of question marks, we do not know how the film's going to end. But the process of arriving at that happens in the location, as I say, with the actors, and then the crew joins us. The cinematographer will look at it with me, and we'll run it, and we'll decide slowly and carefully how to shoot it. The actors stay with us so that they can run bits for us, and everybody involved is got their contribution. We decide how to structure it, and then we shoot it. So what we take to the cutting room, to the editing afterwards, is on the whole ordered, precise, and detailed, and there's not a great deal in general that happens in the editing of my films that's about trying to make sense of all this material. It's more about taking advantage of different nuances of behaviour, or different emotional timbres and qualities. Sometimes when we're shooting, I'll say, "Okay, let's cut. Let's do that again." And everybody says, "Why? That was great. What's wrong with it?" And it's not because there was anything wrong with it. It's because my instinct is that we will go to the cutting room with just more nuances. Now, what I didn't say at the beginning, quite as thoroughly as I should, is that, and I know this is obvious, but forgive me. For me personally, and this is only personal, there is absolutely no dividing line between my function as a writer and my function as a director. They are inextricably intertwined, and they are one function. So that the decisions about the structure of the film, about the meaning of the film, about the emotional timbre of the film, about the quality of what happens in the film and of the dialogue and all the rest of it, and my responsibility for the performances and the communication with other artists behind the camera, all of those things are part of the whole. There's no dividing line. It's all part of the whole. Now, what I'm saying is not news in the history of the cinema, but I have to say it in the context of this lecture in this series. So let's go back to what we do in order to make possible what I've just been describing. I will say to an actor, "Please be in this film." I can't tell you what the film is, because we don't know. We're going to find out. I can't tell you about the character, because there is no character, because you and I are going to collaborate to create a character. And I say, and this is very, very important, you will never know anything about the whole project except what your character knows. You will never know anything about any of the other characters except what your character knows. And you will only know that from the perspective of your character. That's very, very important indeed, because it means that it makes it possible for us to explore relationships in depth and in detail, in a real, actual way, through improvisation and discussion and so on. It demands a massive amount of discipline on the part of the actors involved and everybody else involved, to shut up and not spill the beans. And the weird thing is, I can honestly report that it has never been the case that that's happened. People absolutely buy into it and deal with it and do it, and it works. Of course, you will say, but hang on a minute, if you decide to make a film about Gilbert and Sullivan in the original production of The Mikado, or a film about Turner, or a film about the Peterloo Massacre, everybody knows that's what they're in. So they do know what the thing is. Yes, absolutely, and those are the exceptions. But even in the context of those films, we still deployed the kind of approach that I'm here talking about in order to bring to life in 3 dimensions the characters on the screen before your very eyes, as performed for the camera. Everybody knows that, because every book you read will tell you that just before the first night of the Mikado, the writer Gilbert cut the famous song about the punishment fitting the crime, a list of people who would be culpable. And the chorus went to him in a posse and persuaded him to restore the song, which he did, and it's in the film. You will read that that happened in every book on the subject, and there are lots of books on the subject. But nobody will tell you who said what, or where they were, or what the argument was, or what the atmosphere was, or how he easily was persuaded, or any of those things. We still had to create those things. We had to invent them. And there are hundreds of examples of that sort of thing in the historical films, including in Peterloo, as well as deploying some research into making things happen that are, in one sense or another, recorded. But that's an aside, because the main principle of creating the films, the contemporary films, which explore situations and relationships through character and so on and so forth, work on the principle, are achieved on the principle that we're able to explore situations, explore relationships, explore the whole thing on the basis that people only know what their character would know, and they react through the character in a completely real way. So I will say to the actor, okay, take part, please. The first job, when we sit down to do this, everyone gets together for an hour or so, and just to say hi, everybody knows who's involved, and then everyone goes away, and I start to work individually, separately, and really in a sense privately with each actor. And on the whole, with tiny exceptions that aren't worth discussing, this is what happens. I'll say to an actor, look, make a list of real people you know. Sometimes I might give a specification of something, but quite often I don't. The only specification I always give is of the same sex as you. And the actor will I said, don't make notes, just put the names down, and then you'll talk about them. And for session after session, and sometimes quite a long number of sessions, I will work with this actor in the morning and that actor in the afternoon and another one the next day and so on. And each actor will talk about this person and then that person, and I'll ask questions and I'll make notes, and that takes a while. And I will say, well, actually, let's get rid of her, let's keep her on the list, gradually whittle it down. What I don't do, and this is obviously logical in terms of what I've just shared with you about the actors not knowing about the whole thing, what I don't do is say why I'm making those decisions. Because what I'm doing as the writer-director, what I'm doing is thinking about the possible film. So I'm thinking about possibilities with this actor, thinking about possibilities with that actor, and starting thinking how that resonates with what I had in my head before, or if I didn't, what it starts to suggest. So in other words, I'm starting even at this prenatal stage to interact and respond to the material, and it's letting my imagination be free. And gradually, we'll whittle it down, and usually what happens these days is that it comes down to 3 people, and we then combine these people, and that becomes the basis of the character. Now, at this point of talking about it, I have to make it very clear that what we're actually talking about now is very much a sophisticated aspect of the acting involved. And it is about the act. It's not just about talking. You can talk about somebody for 100 years. But, of course, what we're actually talking about is not only the idea of the character, not only the facts of a character, and not only what we're mostly going to invent, partly using as a jumping-off point the embryo character we started with, but it's also about not just the character, but the characterization, which is to say how the actor plays the character, how the character walks, talks, breathes, thinks, etc. And that can only be achieved by actually acting. Now, of course, the conventions of acting are mostly that you get a script and then you start acting what it says. But we're not anywhere near that stage. We always do this preparatory stuff, which, by the way, a lot of these films, it's gone on for 6 months before the shoot, and people are paid to be there and come and go and so on. We always find some old building of some kind to use for our rehearsal base, with multiple rooms of various kinds, and with certainly one big space, if not more than one. Old schools are very good for this. But we've done it in various kinds of buildings. And a building where nothing else is happening, where you're not sharing it with a scout troop or a women's institute or any of that. It's a serious laboratory for exploration, uninterrupted. So we will arrive at, say, okay, well, it's so and so and so and so and so. These are and even with more minor characters, where I don't necessarily combine more than one person, we just get one person and get that person on the go. The first thing to do, get that person on the go as a character. The first thing that happens is I'll say to the actor, okay, we're going to a big space, just move around and find the person you're talking about, do the person you're talking about. Don't try and make a scene. Don't try and be dramatic or theatrical or interesting. Just find him or her physically and just get into the rhythm of the character. The actor will do that for a bit. And we'll say, okay, let's put him on one side. Let's look at him now. And then do the second one and the third one for quite a while. And by the way, one of the techniques that's very important for me in helping actors to settle into this way of working is that I will invariably say to an actor, okay, I'm going to leave you alone for a bit. I'm going to go out of the room. I will come back. I will sit quietly in the corner. Stay in character until I tell you to come out of character. And I'll leave the actor alone because it just helps the actor to rid himself or herself of any need to show or perform, just to get into the rhythm, the discipline of just being in character. Look, it doesn't work for all actors. And just in passing, I should say, I do elaborate auditions at which I get people to do the sort of thing that I've just been talking about. And there are very good actors, very well-known actors and other actors who aren't well-known but are very good. It doesn't suit everybody. Not all actors are character actors. And for the kind of work that I do, in which you've seen in my films, it is absolutely about character acting. It is not about actors, as I've already said, it is not about actors playing themselves. It is about going into character, being the character, and then being able to come out of character. And that's important, but I'll come back to that in a few minutes. I'll say to the actor, okay, now you've got these, you've done all three of them. In this corner is A, in that corner is B, and in that corner is C. Just go back into it, go from one to the other. I'll leave you to it for a bit. And see what happens if you try and merge them together into one character. And the remarkable thing is that I can report to you that it has never been the case, ever, and I've done this any number of times, that an actor has said, I can't really find, it doesn't work, there isn't a way of combining these. It always works. I mean, obviously, there's something built into instinctively built into the choice, but you can't, it's not rocket science, you can't guarantee it. But what emerges, and this is the important thing, aside from the mechanics, is an embryo character. And so I've got this embryo character, that embryo character, and we start to talk the character into existence. Now, it may be that it turns out to be a character who will only meet other characters or another character way down the line, perhaps even not till the action of the film, and certainly not till somewhere into their adulthood, some way well into their adulthood, possibly. So in that context, we create the whole character, we talk into existence and invent his or her name and background and all the rest of it. The actor can go and do research that will help to put flesh on the bones of the character in all sorts of ways. Work research, background research, place research, and stuff like what movies would the actor have, books read, sports played, food eaten, holiday, etc., you name it. But it may be that, and it often is, as you will know from having seen some of these films, that we're talking about the relationships between people who spend a lot of time together, siblings, parents, children, married couples, etc., long relationships, where the characters would have met, and in the case of people whose lives need to be explored from when they were babies, because we've got their parents involved as everything, that has to be invented in detail and not in isolation. That has to be the ways of collaborating on that. So we actually go through a long process of exploring relationships through improvisation, through various kinds of improvised exercises of various kinds, which I'm not going to illustrate here, merely to say that it's very much a combination for a very long time of acting, talking about it, research, experiment of various kinds, and things like naming sessions where you sit down and make a list of the possible things this character could be called, etc., etc. I remind you that my job throughout all of this is to function as the creator, the writer-director, if you want to call it that, of the ultimate film. And it's moving it in a direction of possibilities. Sometimes it's clear, and sometimes it isn't. I mean, if you take a film like Naked, for example, which I'm going to illustrate later, and which you will probably be familiar with, I mean, what happens in Naked is extremely complex, and of course is a combination of extremely unpredictable things, but at the same time, you know, the other characters had to be there for the protagonist, Johnny, to interact with in the first place. So it's a combination of me thinking of possibilities and setting those up, and then being prepared to let certain things go or be replaced by other things, or to realise that something else was actually more important and better than what I thought we were going to do, or as an amplification of that, and all of those things. So gradually, there comes into existence, there creeps into existence this world, or these worlds. You can't, some people say, well, when do you decide when it's time to start shooting? Well, that's a ridiculous question. You don't decide when it's time to start shooting. When we sit down to have a long rehearsal period, we know that shooting is going to start on September the 1st or whatever it is. And that's a non-negotiable fact. And that, of course, can't mean that on the Friday before the Monday in question, I suddenly say, well, I think there'd be a house, and, you know, that's obvious rubbish. It needs to be prepared. We need to have locations. But more, as important as that, if not more so, we have to have thought about the feel of the film, the look of the film, the quality of the film, the atmosphere. So there's always an agreed time. I mean, to start with, as I've just been describing, to start with, it's about what I do with the actors. It's about the acting. Operating with the cast coming and going, and incidentally people are contracted to join in, and gradually it grows, and supported by a small team of assistant directors. But there comes an agreed point, an agreed time, a disciplined date, when I'm going to sit down with the cinematographer and the designers, production designer, costume designer, and the makeup designer, but principally with the cinematographer, to say, I think what's emerging is this. I'll illustrate what I'm talking about. With Naked, all my films were shot by Dick Pope, who, as you may know, sadly died 10 days ago, and it's a great loss to all of us. He shot everything that I have made since Life is Sweet in 1990, and was a brilliant genius cinematographer, photographically, and a wonderful operator, and a great artist, and a friend, and a collaborator. Well, I thought I'd just share that. Share it with the cinematographer. And with the case of Naked, I said to Dick, I think there's something dark, nocturnal, perhaps monochromatic about this in some way, knowing that we were going to shoot in colour, of course. And he said, okay. And he thought about it, and he went away and shot tests. This is what he would always do, shoot tests. And that feeds back. We negotiate and share that. And that, what I see and what we share, starts to feed back into the decisions I'm making with the ever-evolving potential story. With Happy Go Lucky, for example, I was able to, because it was emerging, the character of Poppy and the spirit of the film, I was able to say to Dick, I think it's some are primary colours, you know, it's bold and clear. And he said, all right, we'll look at that. By a strange coincidence, that weekend was the annual film market, film industry market in London. And he went along to that, as he routinely would. And there was a company with this film stock, Fuji. Fuji had a store, and they had this new stock, which was for primary colours. And he said, this is amazing. This is what we want for filmmaking with Mike Leigh. And they said, and they were so amazed to find anybody that wanted this stock that we got it for free, and we shot. When we were preparing Another Year, I said, I was rather vaguer than I sometimes would be. And I said, it's sort of this and it's that. And he He said, OK, I don't quite, I think I know what you mean, I'm not sure, but I'll shoot some tests. So we shot some tests, and at 8 o'clock one morning we rolled into a preview theatre in Soho. He said, there's not much here. He said, there are four different looks. Just see what you think. So I sat there. And I had at this stage, I had the characters and relationships and all that stuff on the go. We hadn't by any means got to the point we were going to, but it was very much on the go. And I went in there. It only lasted a few minutes, very brief clips. And I sat there and suddenly I had this incredible revelation. I came out, he said, well, which way do you want to go? I said, all 4 ways. He said, you're mad. What do you mean? I said, the film will be spring, summer, autumn and winter. And he said, oh, I see. Yes. Okay. Having made that decision, when I then went back into the construction of the film and the investigation of the characters and things, suddenly it informed that. So in other words, I tell you this because obviously it's all about the synthesis of the relationship between form and content, between the cinematic visual, the dramatic construction, the characters, the relationships, all of these things are part of the whole. So we progress on this journey of bringing into existence these characters. And this is important in the context of this seminar. We're not only talking, and I'm talking about what happens with each actor and the actors in combination with each other, where it's appropriate. We're not just talking about the background or the behavioural part of the characterization or the physical aspect. All of those things are part and parcel. But we're also, as much as anything, we're talking about what comes out of their mouths, which is part of how important it was that we're rooted in some kind of world that's real, background. So we start to talk about, in the preparatory period, about the kind of language they use, about the kind of input where they get their ideas from. Again, if you go back to Naked, and I'll illustrate this later on, this is, if you remember the central character Naked, I mean, he reads books and his head is bursting with all kinds of stuff. Some of it's ridiculous and some of it's profound. But it's all there, and it all starts to inform how he talks and how he... But that, even when we're talking about characters who never read a book or who are inarticulate or whatever, still, how does the character express his or her ideas? What governed or motivates or motivated the character's formative language and all of those things? That's important, along with every aspect of the character and his or her life. And again, to repeat, it is about character acting. So one of the things that we do, which is very, very important and highly disciplined, is the actors develop a process. Each actor develops a particular way of warming up into character. So they are in character, really in character. It's not an instant thing. And when whatever we're doing comes to an end, knowing how to come out of character. Because it's important, and this is where it's the other end of the spectrum from some notions of method acting and all of that. The actor, when in character, needs to be totally organically in character and knows how to, and is able to stay in character. And there's a very strict discipline. Unless there's a crisis, something catches fire or something, somebody has a heart attack, you don't come out of character until the instruction is issued, come out of character, which means that everybody stays in it and they trust each other that they're all there. So there's a discipline about going into character and coming out of character. That's really important because it means that, apart from anything else, the actors are able to be objective about the emotional experience that the character just had. And I'm strict that actors always refer to their characters in the third person. She did that, he felt that, not I. I's the actor, he, she is the character. Now, you may say, well, that's a technicality. It's not. It's a very important discipline. It's part of being able to create a world that absolutely lives organically, but we're able to make choices and distill. Somebody once decided to do, who had worked with me, to do a so-called improvised play along the same lines. And an actress that was in the show, after a very heated improvisation with this guy, when the improvisation was over, this actress said to the director, "You can tell him, if he behaves like that again, I will walk out of this production." Now, of course, what that illustrates is simply that the whole principle of coming out of character and being objective about what happened simply wasn't going on at all. The actress didn't know where the line could be drawn between herself and the character. I just share that minor anecdote to illustrate the point. So gradually this world comes into existence, and I'm starting to, we're moving towards the potential of a film. At no stage during this long preparatory period do we rehearse or fix anything. It is all laying the foundations. It's all potential. We don't script or fix anything. Another important aspect, very important, and those of you that are actors in particular will appreciate this, that from the earliest stage of the proceedings, I get the actors to work in costume. We may start with temporary costumes, and gradually the costume designer will tune into what we're doing and helpfully bring in other stuff. But part of, it's extraordinary that there is a widely practiced convention of actors preparing or rehearsing, wearing their own clothes. Well, you may say, so what? But it's fantastically important because it helps the actor to do the character, to sustain, to discover, to be accurate about the character. So we do that. That's important. Research is fantastically important. Everything you can think of is researched. As I've already said, jobs, background, all those things. I've listed those already. A lot of the time, you've got actor A and B and C and D and E, and maybe we're concentrating on what happens between A and B. That's my walking stick falling over. Which means that somebody else, other people, are not involved. That's the time for them to go off and do research. If you look at Secrets and Lies, you will see Marianne Jean-Baptiste being an optometrist. She went off and learned how to be an optometrist. And there is indeed a scene in the film where she's doing it. She actually is doing it with a little kid. But even if there wasn't a scene in the film, and we didn't know that there was going to be necessarily, it's all part of making the character and the characterization three-dimensional. When it's getting towards its later stages, we do things like we have sessions where I throw out all sorts of random things, questions, to start to fill out the things we hadn't necessarily talked about, so that the actor has a real three-dimensional sense of the character and a knowledge of what's in the character's head, all of which is going to be important and is important. And throughout all of this, we are constantly doing improvisations. Now, I've said we get spaces to work, places with spaces to work in. We always have a huge amount of furniture, beds, sofas, televisions that work, everything, you name it, newspapers, magazines, kettles that boil, you name it, all sorts of stuff. Because we're not talking about the kind of improvisation that's about, it's not it isn't Marcel Marceau miming. It's about settling into real people in real time and not trying to make interesting things happen so that it settles down into a reality. And in the discipline throughout all of these sessions, all these improvisations, is that 60 minutes is 60 minutes. 3 hours is 3 hours. I personally should be in the Guinness Book of Records because I have sat through more long, boring, tedious improvisations than anybody else in the history of the world. But it's an occupational hazard and it's necessary. There have been famous improvisations where X and Y are sitting in a room that we've created and they have a row. And X gets up and walks out. This has actually happened a few times. X walks out in character, leaves the rehearsal place, goes out into the real world, and we do quite a lot of stuff involving that. Difficult with the period films, but we don't do it so much then. Stays in character. The person that they've left behind stays in character, and eventually, and I shut up. I don't stop the improvisation. Eventually, the other person comes back, and it carries on. But what we've been doing, of course, is building the background experience and the potential for the drama. Of course, my job is to move it in this direction, coax it in that direction. So actually, instead of that, why don't we make decide that it's this? And sometimes, of course, I will introduce new ideas, obviously, if I decide, as I did, and I've shared with you, that I'm going to make a film about a woman who's been adopted, tracing her birth mother, then obviously I've got to set it up. Famously, we've got a long way down the line, and finally we reached the point where Hortense, Marianne Jean-Baptiste's character, it was time for her to find her mother, Cynthia, played by Brenda Blethyn. Brenda Blethyn was in this set, this home that we'd created in this. We were doing the work in an old school in Stoke Newington. She had a mobile phone, an earlier version of a mobile phone. The phone rings. A woman speaks to her with a London accent. And eventually, and obviously this is what is distilled in proper dramatic terms in the actual film later, they agreed to meet. Knowing as I did that she was going to be the mother of this black baby, played by Marianne Jean-Baptiste. When we were much earlier, when we were building the backstory, the life of Cynthia, she was a promiscuous, vulnerable 16-year-old, susceptible to guys in a terrible way. And at one point I said to her, okay, we agreed she's at a party and anything could happen. So I said, okay, I suggest there's a black guy. And they go into the bathroom. She said, okay, yeah. And I don't remember if it was I or she, but suggested that they would have a fuck. And then Cynthia forgot about that. And so did Brenda Blethyn. She actually forgot. So we'd set up an improvisation, actually in the street outside the cemetery in Stoke Newington. At dusk, lots of people moving around. I watched it, as I always do, discreetly from the other side of the road. And Brenda, Blethyn in characters, hanging around, waiting for this person to show up. As I said earlier, on day one, everybody meets and you know that those involved, but then you never see them again. Brenda thought, because she'd only heard this person on the phone, she thought that the character she was going to meet was played by a white actress in the film. A young black woman approaches her and says, "Excuse me, are you Cynthia. And Brenda's reaction was, shit, I'm in the middle of an improvisation, somebody, general public's talking to me. But she dealt with it. The rest developed from there. But that's just an illustration of the principle of people not knowing, and and of me, the way I've obviously got, of course, as a dramatist, to be in what you might cynically call manipulative, but only because that's what we're there to do, is to tell a story. But, there's lots of stuff, massive amounts of stuff in my films where it's not there as a function of my manipulation. It grows out of what's happened, and I get new messages, and it tells me what needs to happen. If you go back to Naked, and I know illustrate with these particular films for any particular reason, but if you remember at the end of Naked, he finally grabs the money and hobbles down the street, and we hold it with a steady cam, and following down the street with a house with a flat in that is just left in the background. And then it goes to black, and that's the end of the film. And he's hobbling because you'll remember he's been beaten up and he's not in a good state physically. We couldn't decide, does he go back? We couldn't decide what to do. Every possible ending was in some way or other potentially interesting and rich. And I used to drive to that location every day from my home in North London and see this house down this street. I didn't really pay any attention until one day I just spotted it. I saw it then, I saw the street, and I thought, I know what happens. And I saw the image of the end of the film. Like so many images and things that happen in my films, and I'll illustrate these very shortly. I could not sit in a study, in a room, in an office, and think of these things and put them down in a script. But really what I've just said applies to pretty well everything in all of my films. It's a combination of everything that stimulates the realization of the piece of work of the film. So finally, we get to the end of that, and we're choosing locations. Actors who live in a particular house or home or flat or whatever it is have got some input with the designers in choosing not only the location, but not executively, but being helpful, of the designer interpreting what the actors and I are inputting, and also about props. And of course, that's very much happening with the costume designer and the choice of costumes, etc. And we're starting to evolve decisions about, we need a main location that we've got the choice to go back to, other locations that will crop up here and there, and so on and so forth. And very late in the day, as late as possible, I then go away and I sit down and I do write what I call a shooting script. It is not a script in any conventional sense. Scene one, we'll say, scene one. Wednesday, day, interior, flat, X in bed. Scene 2, Wednesday, day, exterior, X walks down the street. Scene 3, Wednesday, day, interior, office, X at work, etc., etc. That's all it says. I've worked out a potential structure of the film, a dramatic, cinematic structure. Potential. I stress the word potential. But also, it's necessary to have such a document, such a collection of possibilities, in order that we can sit down and plan the schedule. And we'll sit in a planning schedule. No actors, there, of course, are involved because they are not involved in this. Everybody else, of course, has got an overview of the film, of the potential film. we will sit in that for long sessions, going right throughout, building the schedule, the potential schedule, knowing that certain things might change and some things can't change. You can't, if you're going to have a scene or a sequence that happens in scene 3, 7, 19 and 27 in one location that you can only get to at certain times or only once or something, then those have to be built into the decision. So I will sit in this session and the AD will say to me, okay, can we shoot scene 32 before scene 29? And I may say, yeah, actually we can, because there's nothing that would happen in scene 29 that would inform what happens in scene 32. Conversely, the question might be asked, and the answer may be no, there's no way. We cannot, unless we've created and shot and investigated exactly what happens in 29, there's no way we can investigate scene 32. So those things happen. And now we're back to where we started, which is the shoot. Start by going to the locations, building the scenes in the way that I've already described. Again, the actors by now have proper costumes to work in. We have proper stuff. 2 famous improvisations in the location. Sorry, 2 famous improvisations, one in the location and one before we ever got to the location, sorry. When we were preparing Vera Drake, where, if you remember, at a certain point in the action, a crucial point in the climax of the action, the police come round and arrest her because she's been identified as an illegal abortionist. We rehearsed the preparatory rehearsals. We call it rehearsing, but we know that it means the actual preparation. For months in this disused NHS hospital, which is up near Alexandra Palace, next to the swimming baths at Crouch End, if you know that part of the world. It's now been restored. It's now a new NHS facility. So we had this whole hospital, and we did different rooms. And there was a flat upstairs where the doctors and nurses had stayed when they were on nights. And that had become, over the course of the long time had already been there by this stage, the Drake family flat. Lots of improvisations went on. As in the film, the family, husband and the kids and the brother and sister-in-law, did not know that their mother, Vera Drake, was performing backstreet abortions, illegal abortions. They simply didn't know because she didn't tell them. And this, by the way, is something that came out of my early research. This was not a not uncommon situation. They did not know that, of course, there's a discipline. You only go to the rehearsal place when you're called, because other things are going on when you're not there, which you don't know about. They did not know that Imelda Staunton and a whole bunch of other actresses had explored through improvisation her helping various women with unwanted pregnancies. She didn't know that the last one had gone wrong. And she didn't know that there were actually actors playing doctor and nurses. And no, the others didn't know there were a whole other bunch of actors playing the police. The guys playing the police started to build a picture of this woman that they thought was going to be aggressive and difficult, i.e. nobody knew what they wouldn't know. So on a Sunday, and this is when we've at it for quite a while, but this is 2 months before we get to the shoot, by the way. On this particular Sunday, there was an 11-hour improvisation. Now, I've already told you that improvisation is 60 minutes is 60 minutes. So 11 hours was 11 hours. And the actors stayed in character throughout the whole of that time. And the police were down there. We created a police station in this big old Anderson ward at one end of the hospital, which, of course, the others didn't know. And eventually, and the family are having this party, which is what you see in the film. They're having this celebration because the daughter has got engaged to the guy next door, and the son the brother and sister-in-law are announcing that they are going to have a baby. All this is going on. All of a sudden, the cops show up with all the concomitant trauma that followed. By the way, my job when these things are going on is to shut up, monitor what's happening, watch what's happening, be as much as possible where I need to be, discreetly and quietly, not have a lot of the assistants aren't around, they're adjacent, assistant directors, so that it's absolute, and I never interrupt unless I actually stop the thing and get people to come out of character, and I didn't, because it would not have been productive. That traumatic experience, and it was traumatic, I mean, they really went through it in character, all in character, but they went through it. That gave us, 2 months later, the experience, or if you like, the raw material, to go back to, in the location this time, in Bethnal Green, Stepney Green, not Bethnal Green, Stepney Green, where we re-explored that situation, plugged back into everybody's memory of that improvisation, and then broke it down and distilled it into the sequence. The whole film only lasts 2.5 hours, and that was 11 hours. So this is merely, we distilled it, and in doing so, of course, we drew absolutely on the experience, but that doesn't mean that when we actually refined it and distilled it down and structured it, and scripted it through rehearsal, that there wasn't input from me about choice of language and stuff, and we weren't, but always drawing from and taking from as much as possible from what they had experienced. Lots of scenes in the films are created without there having ever been a parallel or equivalent situation in the pre-rehearsals. Lots of scenes in the films. I mean, the whole stuff in Naked, which again I'm going to show you a bit of, the sequence with the security guard in the empty building was all created during the time of the shoot in the actual building. But the principle of the thing, wherever and whatever the action, is that you've got actors who can actually do the characters and have everything to make it, to sustain the characterizations and to make what they do and not least what they say consistent and organic and proper for the characters. By the way, it is important to say that you will see in all of my films minor characters, people with one scene and things, who have come in late in the day and sometimes at short notice, and I give them some work that is a version of what we're talking about, so that they too can give a solid contribution. And so we are able to shoot the film. I've got my shooting script. It's there, it's helpful. It's there I share it with the actors to begin with, but only the bits, they each get a version of it. It's only got the bits they're in. They can't read the whole thing, obviously. But it's there. And I also sit down with everybody except the actors and talk through it, so everybody else has got some idea. And that's everybody, literally everybody, apart from actors. So that everyone's got an idea of the potential of the film that we are going to, in some way, realise. And so we shoot the film. And what we take, as I said, to the cutting room, to the editing, is structured and disciplined. Yeah, it's, you play around with it, you move things around, you decide to lose a sequence or a scene or chop things out and all those things. But we do all of that. But we're not looking to try and make sense of a pile of indiscernible spaghetti. I think I've described what we do. I've missed a lot out, obviously, but I think I have sufficiently. And so I'm going to show you 4 clips, each to illustrate a different point, though all of them are in some way or another an illustration of what I've been talking about. First of all, this is from Naked. This is, and you'll forgive me for preceding each one with a little bit of an explanation of what it is and why you're looking at it. This is in the office block with the security guard, Brian, played by Peter White, David Thewlis playing Johnny. I've already talked about the way that Johnny, we built the character with all kinds of research and reading. One day during the preparatory period, I'd been working with one of the other actors in the afternoon, and David, I called him in for a session at, I think, 4 o'clock. We were working in an old building in Marylebone. He came in, he said, God, he said, I'd run into this extraordinary young American, mad American. He was ranting and raving in Soho in the street, about the fact that before too long, in a few years' time, we'll all have our credit cards laser tattooed into our hands or our arms and things, and all of that. That surfaces in what you're going to hear in a minute, as do a million other things, because this guy we created this character who's had it full of all kinds of stuff, some shit, some profound stuff, and some stuff in between. So when we got to the improvisation stage, we improvised, and then he and I, David Thewlis and I, and Peter White, who also has ideas and contributes them when he can get a word in. As I've said several times, we scripted through rehearsal, which is to say we went over and over it again, refining it, changing it, distilling it, and all that, and working on the poetry of it as well as the meaning and the content and the psychological aspect of what he's saying. So that's important. But what's also, I think, important to stress is this. We knew that this was. We had done the improvisations in the office building that we were rehearsing in ages before, a couple of months before, whenever it was. The assumption was, and this is another important aspect I'm about to illustrate, the assumption was that Brian, the security guard, would be guarding a conventional office block with offices full of typewriters and computers and all the stuff. The designer, Alison Chitty, a distinguished opera designer who designed this film and worked with me on several films and a lot of stage work, rushed in one day and she said, I've had this amazing idea. What if he's not guarding an office block full of, but an empty office block with nothing in any of the rooms? And I said, that's amazing. It was really right for the spirit of the film. So that was a really important input into the conception of the thing. Then it came to, we've got this office block in Charlotte Street, and so we said, well, we're going to rehearse it. And the action was all going to take place at night. And I said, you know what? We've got to rehearse this at night. We can't, if we do it in the day, in the middle of, of Tottenham Court Road, and the atmosphere will be different. We've got to do it at night. So we went into nighttime mode for 10 days. The scene you're about to watch, because what I do, I go off and find somewhere to squat, sit, on the floor, on a chair, whatever, and the improvisation set up, and the improvisation happens, and then eventually I stop it and we deal with it. I went and sat in the corner in a dark room with windows, on the other side of which there was another room, obviously, and waited Brian, the security guard, goes around the building, and they used to do little devices all over. They were kind of a clock, and they'd go all around. It would log the fact that he was going around guarding checking out all the different parts of the building. So I sat there in the dark. Eventually the lights came on behind these windows in the next room. And they did some stuff in there. Then they came into the room where I was. But the light switch for the room that I was in was way down the other end. So suddenly they stopped. Johnny stopped Brian, the security guard, and he delivered this rant. Magic. I'm sitting there, and I think this is unbelievably fantastic cinematic stuff. I couldn't have thought of that writing a script privately, but there it was. Okay, the next scene is from Secrets and Lies. It illustrates the complexity of the relationship between the action and the words, because this is the barbecue scene. This is held up in one shot. It's partly held up in one shot because I knew that in the following long sequence of the film, when the shit's going to hit the fan and they find out the truth, that there'll be lots of cuts and things. But also because it seemed a proper and practical way to deal with the practicalities in the scene, which is that you have quite a number of characters. You've got a barbecue going on with all the concomitant elements of a barbecue being served up at the table. The plot is on the go, which is to say, people don't know why she's there and what the relationship is, and that some lying is going on, and all of that. And all of those things are all going on at once, and certain elements are not controllable. The actors are quite controllable. It's been rehearsed thoroughly, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But you can't control stakes, which jump around and have a life of their own. So what you're looking at is a scene which took a long time to make precise, and it is precise. It doesn't look as if it's precise. It's intended to look like real life, which of course all of this stuff is, which is to say it's intended to look like if it's just for real. But it is very, very, very thoroughly rehearsed, because if it weren't, it would be a mess. It would be unlookable at. It would be horrible, and it would not be dramatic. It would not have the tension that it needs to have at this point in the story. And so you rehearse the dialogue, which is to say what's going on in relation to the issues that are preoccupying everybody. You separately work out all the action, and then you carefully weld them together. It's a long and painstaking process. It is about rehearsal. And at all times, it cannot compromise the performances, the characters, the situation. It goes without saying, and this is too obvious to say really, but I will share it, that if you just allowed that to be more ad-libbed or something, you'd get people talking over each other all the time. Nobody talks over anybody else. It's all very strictly scripted, and I think that's important to understand. Now, I'm going to show you a slightly longer sequence, if you compare it, from Topsy Turvy. 3 bits, because which follow onto each other. The first bit, like what you've just seen, involved very thorough rehearsal. However, I've just shared with you that the scene you've just seen took a long days to get right. When we made Topsy Turvy, we shot all the stuff in the theatre, in the Richmond Theatre in West London. And by a strange fluke, there were 5 weeks available in that theatre, 5 dark weeks, which happened to be the 5 weeks we needed it for. So we shot all the scenes in the shows and the audience stuff. But we ran out of time, And the scene you're about to see needed to be shot on the stage with the auditorium in the background. And we only had one day, the final Saturday, and we had to get out because a real show was coming in the next day. So this scene that you're about to see was put together in a day and shot, improvised, scripted, and shot all in one day. And the point about that is that that would be more than singularly impossible if the actors, and all of them that you're about to see, this applies to all of them, were not totally able to sustain that, to do and sustain their characters. And don't forget, this is set in 1885. So this is not just people behaving like people in 1998 when we made the film. It's embodied in what they're all doing is much more profound and extensive research into all kinds of things, including, and this is very important, the language, the way that they talked and everything. And even the characters, the Japanese actors that you're about to see playing Japanese people, they were very grounded in the background of their particular characters in Japan and so forth. Let me just stop, because I've just remembered something that I meant to say and I haven't said previously, though I'm sure it's obvious, and it's this. I was reminded to say this by what I've just said about other people's experience. Apart from anything else, just going back to the business of I couldn't sit in a room and write the screenplays for any of these films, apart from anything else, what goes into these films extends my experience way beyond my own limited experience of people and life, because I learn things that I'm learning along with the actors and everybody else, and that feeds into and expands the possibility of what we're able to put into the film. So all of that's important, including the musical elements that you'll see, which involved extensive musical research and preparation and rehearsal and so forth. But I'm going to show you that main sequence where Gilbert brings the Japanese people from the Japanese exhibition that was on in London at the time, a Japanese village, to show the actors how to be Japanese. There then follow a very short scene and then a final scene, which is the extract from the actual staged opera from the Mikado. But I include the tiny scene between the main scene and the extract from the Mikado because it is actually improvised. Because, as I said, we were under real pressure to get out, and I just wanted something to do with that would follow that. And so we set the camera up and let it happen. And I'm showing it to you because it's a rare exception in my films. But it gives us something which was helpful because it goes from this structured scene, which is the main longer scene that you're about to see, into the very structured extract from the Mikado, for which we used the staging and prompt copy from the original production in 1885 at the Savoy Theatre. So you see, and therefore what you're looking at, apart from anything else, is my sense of structure and the tension between one kind of scene and another, which is part of what we, with our screenplays, ought to be thinking about. I'm going to show you a bit from Hard Truths. Again, I return to what I keep saying, which is that there are things that, I just couldn't sit in a room and script and think about and invent. I won't tell you what it is, but actually, for the first part of this short extract from the scene from the later part of the film, what's being said, what's going on is fairly straightforward action. It's very much served by the actors in depth in character, but still it's I mean, you could say that it's something that anyone could, if they were onto it, write in terms of the dialogue. But then something happens which is not dialogue, which is completely organic and which is action. And it's completely unpredictable. It came out of improvisation, and it was startling when it did, and it's in the scene. On the whole, that's all I have to say to you. Thank you very much.
So I thought I might start at the end, if I may, by asking a question about the end of your most recent film, Hard Truths, although a lot of people won't have seen it, so I won't give any of it away. But I will say that it's already a much discussed ending, and I found it to be both very hard and very true. And I wondered, working in the way that you work, almost making it up as you go along, I suppose.
Well, it is making it. Actually, is that.
How do you know when you've arrived at the end of the story that you want to tell? What does an ending feel like?
Well, you know what? With respect to your question, and it's a fair question, but still, you might ask any artist the same question about any aspect of what he or she arrives at in a piece of work. And I think that point is easily made without even trying to illustrate it in any way, you know. You feel it. I mean, having said that, since endings is what you're talking about, although the question you're asking applies to all sorts of aspects of what's in all of the films. But what I do, I would say like to do, but I'm compelled to do and feel it important to do and prefer to do, is to hand it over to you, the audience. Is certainly not to supply comforting, easy, sugared conclusions. I mean, it varies. I mean, if you look at All or Nothing, for example, you could say that actually it ends optimistically. They go to the hospital, and the lad that's had the heart attack is in bed, and suddenly he's behaving himself, and something has happened between the husband and wife, and they are being positive. But actually, if you look at the daughter, you can see that she's not entirely convinced because something else is going on. But for a lot of the films, you know, and I've already described the end of Naked, or discussed the end of Naked, to sustain it beyond the natural point at which I'm able to say, okay, over to you, go away, discuss it, care about it, argue about it, feel emotional about it, forget about it, whatever. I feel that's an important part of the journey for the audience.
Speaking of indulging the audience, I have heard you say before that you like to give treats to the audience. And the example you used was in Secrets and Lies, actually, where there's the lovely photo studio scene and you get to see everybody posing for their photographs. Yes. I'd suggest that in Hard Truths, the Llewellyn Gideon's lovely scene.
Yes, but I don't want you to talk about Hard Truths.
Yes.
I mean, I've already broken the rules by... well, I do, but, I mean, look, we just looked at this scene in Topsy-Turvy. I mean, they are all the characters in that scene are dead serious about what's going on. It's really important. They're taking it very seriously, as we in show business do. But if it's not full of treats, that scene, what is?
Very much so. Right, let's give you guys a chance to ask some questions.
Hi, hello there. Thank you very much, firstly, for sharing everything tonight. I guess my question is, you've reminded me of the importance of rehearsal. But as a new-ish filmmaker, my struggle with that is that when I know I'm paying basic equity at $150 a day, how the hell do you kind of budget putting in a rehearsal space to get to your end result, to get to that film, to even when you know that your actors are living in London, they've got no money, and you're kind of saying to them, "Can I have some extra time?" I'm just a bit lost actually as to how to square making a film, paying your actors because they should be paid, and your DOP and everybody else, where budgets are as they are, and how do you keep going, you know, as a filmmaker?
Well, first of all, I absolutely sympathise with you and agree with the spirit of what you're saying, the sentiments you're expressing. I mean, and, you know, I will say this. I have been very, very lucky over a long period. It has got harder. It's got tougher for a whole variety of reasons. But in the end, my answer to that, my own personal answer to that, is if it's not feasible, don't do it. I mean, it's a question of course, you try and get as much money as you can. So what we've always said, okay, first of all, what's the budget? And then, how can we allocate this? How can we spend it? Now, if, obviously this applies to what I've been talking about, if it is a non-negotiable priority, or a non-negotiable necessity, I should say, that there is a rehearsal period, that actors are paid for that rehearsal period and paid properly, that there is a space to do it in, etc., etc., etc. And, incidentally, which I didn't mention, that people like production designer and others are on perhaps longer than they might otherwise be because they've got to prepare and things. So that varies on other films. If that is a necessity, if that's a given, then it's a given. When we were going to make Mr. Turner, and any of you that know about Turner will immediately understand and agree with this, I said, whatever happens, we have to see Turner in Venice. It's absolutely non-negotiable. He went to Venice a lot, he painted Venice, and it was an important part of his oeuvre, and et cetera, et cetera. We were lucky, we found a substantial backer in Amazon, who in those days were very enlightened and liberal. This is less the case now. And we got backers. But my producers said, we can do everything you want to do, but there's no way we can go to Venice. Now, anyone here, and lots of you will have done, know that if you go to Venice, you've only got to buy a coffee in San Marco, and it's cost you half a mortgage, basically. So to go there with a film crew, turn up, not film in one corner of Venice, but to deal with the whole of Venice in the early 19th century would be more than $5 bob. So we didn't do it. That was a compromise. But we made the film we made. I mean, that's an extreme illustration. So my point, obviously, is simply, you have to do what you can do and don't do what you can't do. And then you have to make those decisions and priorities. Now, I know, in answering your question, and I absolutely am with you, that what I've just said is easier said than done, but it is the answer, and it's the only answer.
Another question.
I mean, no, actually, just a sort of slight, I thought you were going to say something slightly different when you started. I thought you were merely going to say, I thought you were going to say that rehearsal time, even on a conventional shoot, is very limited. I mean, I see heads nodding already. You know, you don't get time to prepare what you are going to shoot when it's a conventional script, etc. That is unforgivable. Because in fact, and again I referred to this in what I said earlier on, many's the shoot where time is wasted, days are wasted, because people couldn't get it together because there wasn't preparation time. Again, it's about making choices and being disciplined and etc.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. It's been very informative. You didn't talk a lot about editing, and I just want to know, obviously as writers, there's a lot of writers in the room, the dreaded notes we tend to get in kind of pre-production and when we're going through the script writing process. Your way of working seems to circumnavigate that kind of input from people. Do you ever come across those kind of notes in post that you have to address from finances or whoever it might be? And equally, have you ever had to reshoot anything or do any additional shooting during the process?
I'll just deal with the last bit first. We once had to reshoot a scene because unusually the actor wasn't very good, and we got somebody else in, and it was a self-contained scene, and we did a different version of it. But otherwise, no. But your main question is a really important one. No, I don't get those notes. No, because again, it's a question of choices. I haven't talked about this, but for all except my period films, where we've been able to say it's about this, but that's all we've said, about Turn of the Painter, etc. For all the other films, the contemporary films, we go to the backers, potential backers, and say, there isn't a script. I can't tell you what it's about. I can't tell you anything about casting. Please give us the money to make the film. This is absolutely what happens. And don't interfere with it at any stage. Now, there's only two things that happen when we do that. Either they say, great, fantastic, here's the money, go and make a film. Or, as is more often the case, they tell us to fuck off. And we do. And this is the important part of the answer to your question. There's no two ways about it. There's a compromise. My late producer, Simon Channing Williams, sadly no longer with us, used to go off and talk to potential backers. He'd come back and he'd say, they don't care that there's no script. They don't care, they don't know what it's about. They'll give you, we can get loads of dosh out of them, but they will insist on a name, meaning a Hollywood star. I'd say, walk away. I'd say, yeah, but they'll walk away. And the minute there's any suggestion that there's going to be any interference, and it has to be guaranteed that there won't be, I walk away. I don't make the film. So, the editing, we get to the editing, we take the stuff to the cutting room, I sit with the editor. Important that everybody I work with is a creative artist in their own right, including the editor. The input from the editor is important. In the end, of course, I collaborate with the editor. Nobody interferes. There's no committee of executives and all that. We just cut the film as we think it should. I work with a composer who can't do what is often the case, which is to start writing when he or she reads the script. It can only work by the composer reacting to an early cut of the film, a rough cut or an assembly, and then I will go and work. He or she will come up with ideas and we'll talk. Nobody else involved. And we don't, incidentally, for anyone that's interested in it, we don't use temporary music tracks, which is distracting and pointless. And we certainly don't have committees of people sending notes. Or I've never had a note, actually, when I think about it, as far as I'm aware. I mean, the producer will eventually come and have a look and say, she might say, well, what about that? But it's very, very marginal, and it's always in the right spirit and there to be listened to and shared. But in terms of what you're talking about, it doesn't happen. Because, again, it's the same answer as I gave the first question here. It's, you establish the principle beforehand. And if you have to walk away before it happens, walk.
Now, I know you said you didn't want people to emulate you, but I think if everybody was just as uncompromising, everybody, then at least 75% of the British film industry's problems would be solved, right?
Well, yes, and for me the tragedy is that what you've just said is absolutely correct and serious. The tragedy is that, I've been at this for a very, very long time. I'm now 81. And I made my first film, Bleak Moments, in 1971. And I wish that you weren't able to say what you just have. And it's very disappointing to me that it is the case.
Mm. Now, we've got time for one more question if we speak really fast and you make it one that has a yes-no answer.
How do you work with beats? You say
Beats.
that you... Yeah, I'm just really interested. So you have a location, you have your characters, they've done the character work, you presumably have a story structure in your head. Do you give beats? I'd love to know if you have a
Do you
relationship
mean,
to that word.
do I specify before an improvisation what the
Yes,
beats should
yes,
be?
yes.
Absolutely not. I never, ever, ever give any instructions as to what should happen in improvisation. It's a contradiction in terms. An improvisation is an improvisation. It has to be completely organic, completely free. Of course, it's not completely. What's not free is, and I repeat something I said much earlier on, it's not actors just doing whatever comes into their heads in a kind of ad hoc, ad lib way. It's actors in character behaving, doing exactly what the character would do. But the minute you say, and anybody here that's got any experience of improvisation will know what I'm talking about, including the questioner. The minute you say you have to hit certain points, which is a convention of improvising workshops, or this has to happen, or you talk the language of beats, it's impossible. You can't then say, just behave in character and stay in character and do what the character would do. It's simply the two things are incompatible. Hugely incompatible. So no. So the job is, and I've been talking about it for a while, the job is to set up explorations of situations and allow them to go wherever they want to go.
I'm interested in exposition. So, for example, in Secrets and Lies, where there is the revelation,
Yes.
presumably you must direct that in some way, or am I just incredibly naive? Does that simply arise?
No, I'm about to, I will illustrate the point, funnily enough, by exactly that scene. In that sequence, we did a very long improvisation, an all long thing that went on for hours. And then we spent a good 8 days or something breaking it down and building it into a scene. When the shit hits the fan, and it turns out that this woman that's come to the party is the other daughter, the white daughter, in the improvisation, as happens in the film, she was furious. And she, in the improvisation, she got her boyfriend and said, come on, we're off. And we were actually in the house that we were going to shoot in North London, in Southgate. They left, and they literally went off, and they disappeared. And eventually, when I stopped the improvisation, it took quite a long time to find them because they'd gone off. They'd simply gone. And so she came back. Now, this is to answer your question. My job, I mean, there's no way that was it. I mean, I had to resolve the film. So I said to Claire Rushbrook, who's playing the character, is there any way she wouldn't do that? Absolutely not. She would definitely do that. Non-negotiable, obviously. Is there no way she'd come back? No way. She ain't going to see them again. She's furious with them. Fine. So I said, well, how's she going to get back home? She said, well, because they didn't, because they were just hanging around in the greater area where we were. She said, well, to get the bus. Right across the road from the house, at the end of the, literally, short distance away, was a bus stop. So we set up another improvisation with, she goes to the bus stop with her boyfriend, and she's there. And Morris, the Spore character, comes over and tries to persuade her. She says, no way. Again, we kept stopping the improvisation and doing another improvisation. And she said, there's no way she's going back. And she said to him, no way. Then in one of the improvisations, he said to the boyfriend, what do you think? And the boyfriend says, well, maybe you should go back. And because of the nature of the relationship, and up to that point, the boyfriend's being fairly wimpish, really, as you see in the film. At that point, she said, well, if he said that, maybe she would. So we explored that and we fixed it. Then, thus, she was motivated organically, without any cheating or imposition on my part, to go back into the house. Then we could explore the rest of what happened and resolve the drama.
Thank you. That is all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Mr. Michley. Thrilling and inspiring.